Balls. Yeah.
Woo! Holy cow, Lysne, you kept the best straight face ever. Normally, people who are on for the first time, who haven't heard the theme song, we get a much stronger reaction. Welcome back, people, to a special episode of the Kilted Balls podcast. It's super awesome day. I'm very, very excited. As you notice, we have a guest today. This is one of our interview episodes. And with us is the fantastic, most amazing Lysne Tait. So, hi, Lysne.
Hello. Woo!
This is, and Kilted, I don't know if you know this, but way back when we started doing interviews with people, I said, think of people you want to interview. Do you remember that conversation?
I do remember that.
Lysne was the top of my list.
Oh, awesome.
So this is like one of my bucket list things, was to get Lysne on the podcast and interview her. And listeners, if you're like, why hasn't that happened before? I think we expressed that really well last episode, right? Like, that's a thing that I'm not good at, that I work on. Lysne happens to be great about stuff like that. I am atrocious at it. So, you know, I waited till it organically happened. And it did the last time we were together, where she said, hey, I'm going on podcast. I was like, oh, do I got a deal for you?
Nice.
So now we have brought her here. She is, and listeners, you know how I think of like Jer and Stacy and a whole bunch of people, but Lysne is probably the best human I know. So,
oh, awesome.
Like, think about that, listeners, because you know how high regard I hold like Kilted and stuff. So, you know, she's kind of a cool deal. So, we have Lysne here. She has so much to talk about. We're going to try to keep this episode within like 45 minutes, but this might be one, Kilted, that we might have to do a two-parter, because I think there's a lot of stuff here and it's really big. So, Kilted, why don't you start this off for us?
Well, I am super excited because I was not filled in on anything, and we hadn't met until like 5 minutes ago. So I'm very excited to hear this, and I'm sure if Ball speaks so highly of you, this is gonna be wonderful. And yeah, one of the things that we really like to hear is if you have just like your origin story, like how did you get to where you are? You can make it as kind of quick as you'd like, or if you want to go into details, that's amazing too. And then we'll move on from there. So why are you here? How'd you get here?
Isn't that the question? I think the answer is 42.
You have 30. It is exactly. Okay.
It is 42.
You are the best. You are the best.
I did not
How could it be anything else?
How could it be? That is
been proven.
Oh, there's so many things that got me to where I am. I will start with the thing that I usually talk about. And so I run a nonprofit that I started in 2015 called Helping Women Period. And we provide free menstrual products to homeless and low-income people all over Michigan. And we started in the Lansing area. And it was kind of funny because we really didn't mean to start a nonprofit. My friend and I read an article in Huffington Post in January of 2015 at 2:00 in the morning, and we posted it both on Facebook at the same time, and then started messaging each other about it. And the article was about women who don't have menstrual products and are homeless, and what they have to do instead, like use those nasty paper towels from the gas station or T-shirts or socks. And we were just flabbergasted. We thought, well, that's happening in our own backyard, because we had heard of, developing countries. Girls in Africa can't go to school because they don't have the stuff they need. And when we found out it was here, we thought we really need to do something. So we talked for a little bit, and we both like to do events. We thought, well, we'll have a breakfast, we'll invite 30 of our closest friends, maybe raise $500 and give it to the local shelter. We were working with Haven House in East Lansing. And we put it on Facebook on a Sunday. And then on Tuesday, we had to change the venue because we had 100 people coming, not 30.
That's awesome.
It was a little overwhelming. And then on Thursday that same week, we filed nonprofit paperwork because we had people from all over the world who wanted to send us money, and we wanted to be as transparent as possible. So there we were. We had our breakfast. We raised about $4,000 and thought, okay, we don't want to send this all to Amazon. We want to find somebody in our own neighborhood. So we found Mishko, which is a janitorial supply company over in Old Town Lansing. And he said, I have a daughter. I can't imagine her doing without when she needs a pad or tampon. So I will sell it to you at cost as long as you buy 100 cases. And the shelter could only take 2. So we said, okay. 100 cases at that time cost about $4,000. So we were like, okay, this is the way it's supposed to be. So we bought the 100 cases and put them in our cars, in our living rooms. And at that time I had teenage boys and a preteen daughter. And so like they learned a lot about stuffing bags full of pads and tampons, putting them out of the way in the car because they had to get in. And so we just started giving stuff out. And we didn't know very many homeless people. But we knew that there was a need, so we started working with other nonprofits that already had those relationships.
Oh, that's awesome.
Shelters, domestic violence shelters, yeah. So, and then we also, right now, we do food banks. We work with mobile food banks. So they give food, people drive through, and we give them pads and tampons at the end. So it just kept getting bigger and bigger. That first year, we distributed about 33,000 tampons, which sounds like a lot, right? Like, but it just, like, we've grown. This last year, we distributed over 2 million pads and tampons, and we work with over 300 charity partners across the state. So
that is amazing, and it's an interesting. We talk a lot in our podcast about the universe, if you will, talking to you, right, and giving you direction, and you've just got to be kind of smart enough. Smart enough's not the right word. You've got to be able to listen. You got to know where it's right. You got to be aware. And oh my gosh, if this isn't like the classic, like, oh my gosh, there's a need in the world, and you guys like post that, and it's like, bam, like look at how it's blown up and gone crazy.
It's amazing.
And it's a. I have 3 girls. I think our listeners know that, right? And I grew up in a family where I had 4 sisters. So menstrual products has never been a taboo thing for me. And I never understood that people thought it was taboo.
Same.
Right? Because it was just like a normal part of my life. And I've got a few big examples where I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. The first one was, as people know, I kind of have a few different gigs. But in one of my gigs, I got a delivery, and I want to say it was like 2 cases of Tampax pads and tampons, right? Like, they just showed up, like literally monster cases. And I'm like, is someone like playing a joke on me? I'm like, what do I do? And so I started like just handing these out all over to students everywhere. The girls' basketball team was like so incredibly excited. Like, the coach is like, really, you're doing this? And I was like, it's not a weird thing. And the kids were like, you're amazing. But the coach was kind of like weirded out about it. And I thought, that's funny. And I actually had those in my basement for a while because I would just take like, a few boxes to the school or whatever and distribute them. And the other time where I noticed this, and this was from like a female perspective, one of my daughters goes to MSU. And I've told Lysne this story before, but not you, Kilted, or listeners. And I forget where we were at. Maybe a football game, maybe whatever. I don't know. And my daughter like walks into the MSU library, walks up to the desk, and is like, hey, I need a pad. And the guy behind the desk was like, what? What do you need? And she's like, it's behind the desk. It's in a box. There's pads there. Get me a pad. And my wife is like, you're just like so frank and so forward. And like, she was kind of like taken aback. And I'm like, oh, you're part of a different generation. And, she tried to defend the guy like, well, you're in a library. It could have been a pad of paper. It could have been this. I'm like, for sure. But I think it's more the fact that somebody was talking about menstrual products right there in the open with no, like, fear or shame. And I think it threw you off. And so, because it probably
that's
wasn't
awesome.
as big. So
You told that story actually on a podcast when it happened, and I have the same background as Ball, where it wasn't a big deal. And I don't know if you remember this, Ball, and I actually told this story yesterday, which is hilarious, and I don't remember how it came up. My he's almost 5. We had his birthday party, but when I was in elementary school, I would the bags that came with the pads would go into the spot where you pack your lunch. So I would put my chips in these bags, and that's what I would, you know. I mean, it wasn't the big deal. I was like, oh, okay. And ever since, like, I could drive, like, I was the person. Like, if I was leaving the house, my mom would be like, oh, pick me up this or that, and it was never a big deal.
Yeah.
So, but it's awesome that you.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's,
yes.
It is, and it's amazing how many times. Well, when we first started, my co-founder we had a TV interview, and she said, "Don't say pads and tampons. Say feminine hygiene products or feminine sanitary products or something like that." And that was 2015, and now I only say pads and tampons. I'm like, I don't like the term feminine hygiene because that makes it sound dirty, and I don't think it.
Yeah.
I have a degree in linguistics, so I'm like, oh, language is really important.
Well, they don't.
So you don't say plugs.
No. And you don't, but you don't say like hygienic paper for your butt. Like,
I might start saying that.
Right?
Exactly.
You didn't change the hygienic sanitary paper.
That's hilarious.
That's how it should be. Okay, so then you started this thing, and now it is like Kilted. You haven't gotten to see this, but in my area for sure, it's huge, right? It's like blossomed. Lysne has a van that's like helping women, period, all over it. And
that's awesome.
It keeps
bright red, and her name is Flo.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect. Yeah, and she's done stuff with the legislature. So, like a lot of people don't know, is there's a lot of weird rules or taxes with tampons and pads and stuff, which is insane to me, right?
Oh, not in Michigan anymore.
Not in Michigan anymore. We changed the law. So I bet there's laws, Jer, down in your realm. I bet if you looked it up, Kilted is in North Carolina.
Okay.
I bet you have those.
I bet you we do.
Taxes and stuff.
Carolina's one.
Oh, see, she's checking right now. Bam.
Oh, nice.
We were able. I helped get rid of the tampon tax in Michigan. So Helping Women Period does 3 things. We distribute product. We like pads and tampons, and we also do alternative products. And then we do an education bit. We have a menstrual product petting zoo, and sorry.
Was it a sales tax, like an extra sales tax on?
It was a sales tax.
Okay. Wow.
And there's 23 other states that do not have sales tax now on their tampons. But then when we started working with that, we decided that giving pads and tampons is just solving a symptom, and really what we needed to do is solve the problem. So we started doing advocacy. So like at the city, at the state, and at the national level, I try and talk to legislators and teach them what menstrual products are and what the problem is and how it's not covered by SNAP or WIC, which are 2 federal programs. And you'd think Women, Infants, and Children, which is WIC, would cover pads, diapers, and formula, and they only do formula. So,
like, that's bizarre, right? Isn't that just bizarre?
It's crazy.
It was created in the 1930s, and there were only men in the legislature, and people didn't talk about dirty things back then. So they didn't talk about pads or tampons or diapers. So, that's...
But didn't they have separate buildings where you just had to go live for a week?
There we go. Isn't that in the Bible and stuff? You got to live separate.
Yeah. So I mean, that's why it is the way it is. I mean, I wish it would change, and there are different laws waiting in bills that are floating around waiting to get passed or killed, either one. But
Mm-hmm.
they want free products in schools, free products in high schools and colleges,
Yeah.
public buildings, incarcerated, and for incarcerated people.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they're not free always blew my mind. And then to find out that they were taxed blew my mind even more. Like, again, it wasn't a thing for me, so I never even thought about it, right? Like, they were just always there, so I didn't think about it. And then when you become an adult and you're out buying them,
Mm-hmm.
They're expensive.
yes.
Yeah.
I'm like, this doesn't make any sense for a need that you would
Yeah.
not only sell them, but that now it's being taxed on top of that, right? Like,
Now, do you still have? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Do you still have the relationship with that first company, especially because you've grown so much, or do you have other manufacturers that you work with as
We
well,
still
or
have-
they're just growing with you?
Yeah, Mishko is really growing with us. And
Awesome.
when I first started talking to him, like none of the guys in the back, like in the warehouse, would barely say tampon. And now like, really
Awesome.
relaxed about it. And we were able to give a link to other people who want to do what we do in other states. And like, here's Mishko's, this is how you can order online from them. I do work with some other places because we get probably 20% of our income is in-kind donations. So from Procter & Gamble or Honey Pot or other groups like that, we get semi-truckloads and then distribute them again.
Nice.
But we usually just purchase from Mishko.
Okay, that's awesome.
so I got
Yeah.
two questions
That's my
for
business
you.
brain.
Yeah, that is. I know. As soon as you were asking, I was like, "Oh, there's the business plan." So, Lysne, this started as an entrepreneurial podcast back in the day, and then we've kind of like taken lots of different avenues. But this fits that same thing because you started the nonprofit and stuff, which is exactly what we're talking about. Like, how do you start and get going with that stuff? But I have two questions, and I'm probably going to forget both of them because I think I might have already forgot one. So that's super exciting to me.
Write
But
it down.
I know. I was thinking when I sat down, I need like a pad of paper to write all my questions and queries. But I do have one. At one point, we had taken in a young lady. She was going through issues. So I didn't have just my 3 girls and my wife. I had 4 girls here and my wife. All, teenagers, all menstruating. And the interesting parts that I didn't know is there's more than just pads and tampons.
Yep.
Right? So they started using, what were they using? Cups, is that right?
Menstrual cups.
They
Yep.
were-
Like the Diva cup is one brand. Yeah.
And so they were like experimenting with that because, they're teenagers. They were like 18, 17, 19, And so like one of them would be trying like, oh, I use this. And the other one would be like, oh, that doesn't work for me. And they're like, and I'm like completely out of my league at this point, right? Like I didn't even know the name. Like, I'm like, I thought there were tampons and pads. And I've been yelled at for other things too. Like, I feel like I know stuff, and then I find out I'm completely ignorant. It's like I've talked about before. You don't know what you don't know, and as you learn more, you learn so much more. Ooh, I remember my first question. But as I'm doing that, like one of the things I got yelled at probably within the last couple of years is they were like, "Hey, we need pads or whatever." Blah blah blah. And I'm like, "Cool," and I brought home pads, and apparently the old people pads are not the same. Yeah, I got in trouble for that one. So, they're like, there's a difference. I'm like, you said get a liner, it said liner. Like, they're all in the same realm. I'm just like getting stuff.
Well, and there's so many products to choose from. Like it's an entire aisle, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. And like most of the time my daughters are specific, right? Like, Dad, we need heavy flow this, and I need this size. And I'm like, good. But sometimes they're just like, go get me some liners. And I'm like, okay, I got liners. And they're like, you're an idiot. And I'm like, dang it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But yeah, so there's a lot more out there besides just pads and tampons.
Yeah.
And Kilted and I had a friend, way back, 95, 97, 98. 97, 98, and she always used like literally rags. Like she used dish rags. She never used pads or anything. That was like her jam. Do you remember that?
Mm-mm.
Oh my gosh.
I was trying to remember.
It was
Doesn't
Jess.
sound. Oh, did she?
Yeah.
I don't remember that. I should
Well,
remember that.
they do have reusable pads now.
Yeah.
Good underwear. And we do that menstrual product petting zoo I was telling you about. We take products like that are alternative and take them to events like touch a truck events or other kinds of community things.
Yeah.
So we can explain to people what they are and they can touch them. We can explain how to use them. Because like you said, a lot of our mothers never use that stuff, so we don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I will give you, since you said you were going to do liner notes, I'll give you a link to my video that does the menstrual product.
Yes.
So you can learn about all the different.
I'm going to be learning how to add these all to this video, people. So you're going to be seeing things happen like in real time as I'm like throwing junk on the video as we go. So the second question that I have is pre-helping women period. I think I read the same article, right? And I just took like a brief ADD dive, that night into like the world, not the US. And it was atrocious to me. And so my question is there thoughts, is there plans to grow? Are there people that you're teaming with that are worldwide, or is it enough just to try to fix like Michigan?
I am only intending to fix Michigan and maybe the US. Okay. Really, I just heard statistics the other day. In the US, 1 in 4 people who menstruate miss school or work because they don't have the products they need. Wow. In Uganda, it's 1 in 10.
Oh my goodness. Like 1 in 4 is bad.
Right? I mean, 1 in 4 is 25%. Like, I'm not a math person, but I know that much. And it just, that blew my mind. And it was UNESCO who did the report on Uganda. So it's not like somebody making up numbers.
Right.
And often when we first started, people would say, well, are you doing anything for overseas? I'm like, no, it's right here in our own backyard.
Yeah. Which I think is important. Like, I think people need to know that we're not talking about, it's one of the things that I always have issues with when people do missionary work in Haiti. I'm like, you're going there on vacation, and they're like, no, we're helping the poor. I'm like, we got poor. We've got that. And they need help. Like,
right down the street.
Yes. I'm like, help the people. Like, people in Haiti need help. That's not what I'm saying. Right. But what I'm saying is you're doing it for a different reason when you're going to Haiti.
Yeah, it's kind of vanity rather than...
I really feel that, and then I get yelled at. And I'm like, no, it's not like you're keeping it secret that you're doing it. You're broadcasting it everywhere. Yeah. You're putting it on Facebook. I go, it's like when you give somebody a sandwich and you're taking a TikTok of you giving somebody a sandwich. You're doing it for links, not to be like...
Yes, performative. Yeah.
Yes. Which
that's I really believe that if you want to have change and you want to work towards change, you cannot be invested in the final outcome, right? You can't say, this is exactly the way it needs to change. You can talk to other people and say, let's change things. And I don't think that what's going on right now is right. And so you work together. And so probably what is going to happen is the change is going to be better than what you had thought. But if you let go of that kind of ego, I think that's really the way to do it.
I saw you smile, Patrick. You see why I brought her, right?
So what you just said may have been like what every single great teacher says. Like, just focus and do your thing and don't like be tied to an outcome. Like, just do it. Like, whatever happens, if you're limiting yourself if you think it has to happen a certain way.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh
that's why I smirked, and I was just like, oh my gosh, it's
like
you're
she
exactly
speaks
right.
our language, right? She speaks our language. So.
Well, I was a teacher for a couple years, and so
we're not talking about just teachers.
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
We're talking about the greats. That's who he compared you to, just to give you.
No, but okay, this is all in my book, but
good.
I was
good segue.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but I was waiting for this.
So what pushed us to finally get Lysne here is Lysne has written a book. And listeners, Kilton and I have been like on the book journey a lot. And trying to be authors about stuff that we talk about on the podcast. So when Lysne started this process, I was so excited, and I'm covering up Kilted's face right now. You can see it's at Barnes and Noble, except I'm losing it there. Okay, so the title is Instigator, Creating Change Without Being the Loudest Voice in the Room, which clearly we all know I have issues with. But, you know, I'm super excited about the book. I joined the pre-sale club. I don't know when you get a book from the pre-sale club, by the way, but I'm excited to get one and read it and get after it, which, as the listeners know, is a huge huge honor, we're going to say, because normally books like Instigator, I don't read. So, like, I get tons of books all the time, a lot of business books. There's tons sitting around me right now. And one of the things that's funny is I'm really good about telling people what to read. I'm really bad about reading those things. And so this is one that I'm actually crazy excited to read. But give us the talk. Where did it come from? What are you doing with it? Like, I'm just super excited about the entire thing.
I'm excited. I didn't even realize it was, like, I don't know. I've been working on it for about 2 years, and I didn't want to believe it till it was actually in my hands. You know, it's
You're a published author. How freaking cool is that? Look, there it is. Yeah, hold that sucker up. Let us get a good look.
It's really nice and thin too.
I'm trying to find it.
But so I realized that I like to start things. Started helping women, period. I helped start a charter school back in '95, and I started a Facebook group. It's a local women's networking group. We have 25,000 members, and we have about 7 spin-offs of that Facebook group. So anyway, I decided, I was like, I like to start things. Let me talk about why I've started these things. And so I wrote the book. I forgot everything I was going to say, because while you were talking, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what.
Okay, I found it.
But anyway, so part of this book, part of how I learned how to be an instigator was when I started teaching. And I had subbed for a year after I got my teaching certificate. And I went to it was called the Mayo Conference, so Michigan Alternative Education Organization. And, you know, I had a t-shirt on that said, "We'll teach for food," because I just wanted to teach. Like, that's really all I wanted to do. And my friend introduced me to this guy, Don Tassi, who was one of her, he was her principal for a while. And he was starting a charter school. And he's like, "Well, come interview. Here's my name." And so I went and interviewed, and it was a horrible interview. And I cried.
Oh, my.
And I mean, I was 24 or 25. I mean, it was really...
Cried in the interview?
In an interview,
oh,
yeah.
Nice.
Just, it was...
Because you're so happy? Because you're, like, so glad to be there?
He's like, "Do you really want to teach, or do you just want a job?" And I was just like, "But I want to teach," you know.
Yep.
So we started this charter school. It's called the Da Vinci Institute in Jackson, and it's still there. At first, I was hired the day before school started. I was the English department for this high school, and we had no chairs or no tables when the kids came.
Amazing.
And the school was supposed to be a manufacturing-based charter school. This is in the very beginning of charter schools. So the nice thing was we didn't have a lot of oversight. And so we could do what we wanted to do. So the kids called us all by our first names. We spent probably the first 3 months just getting them used to the idea of a school where people cared. I mean, not that people don't care in the other schools, but a lot of the kids that we had were alternative. They were just bored in their other schools. They didn't know how to fit into that straight, you know, here's math, here's science, here's whatever. And, you know, a lot of them came to us. They were pokey hair and pokey jackets, like punks. And A lot of them had ankle bracelets. I mean, it was just, and I'm shorter than all of them, so it was it was an interesting time. But our goal was to make them change their idea of what school was, and so they knew that this was a safe place. And I didn't teach any English probably until November that year, because we were just trying to get to know our kids. And we had 3 rules in that school. You had to be reasonable, respectful, and responsible.
Nice.
And that was it. And we didn't do grades. We did portfolio grading. And so there were a lot of things that took kids a while to understand, because they were used to saying, oh, I have this essay and it needs to be 500 words or 5 paragraphs, and there's got to be a beginning. And we would assign things and say, I want you to, what do you want to write about? And they were like, bah. And then, how long does it have to be? And I'm like, till it's done. So it was, I don't know, it was wonderful though. Like, it was such a great experience. And we were working 10-hour days for that probably for the first 2 years, because the teachers also were the business part of the school. We had an incorporated entity that did all the business part, and all the teachers were part of that. And then we also taught. And
oh, wow.
I learned a lot about business then.
Oh, I imagine. So. It's interesting because I had teachers approach me. God, I don't know. Time stands still for a teacher, So
yeah.
I saw a student the other day from 2003, 4, or whatever, and he's like, "Oh, you probably don't remember me." I'm like, literally, it was like yesterday. Like, time stands still. So you didn't, right? So I go, that didn't move, but. They were talking and they were like, let's do a charter school. We can handle all the administrative, all the business stuff, and we'll do the teaching and stuff. I'm like, I don't think you understand what you're trying to take on. I don't think you have a concept. And they're like, oh, it's probably not that bad because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, that's not good. So to hear that you actually did that is crazy to me.
And it's still there.
And it's
That's
still
awesome.
there.
Yeah.
So you did a good job.
Well, it's changed a lot since we started it, but
things evolve.
that's the way it goes.
Yes. Things change, things evolve.
Yeah. So when we had those kids and we had this auditorium filled with 100 kids, and we were trying to figure out, how are we going to do this? What are we going to... And we talked to the kids. We realized that they were so used to authoritarian kind of learning, you need to do this. This is what you do. This is how you have to sit. And we wanted them to find the spark, what made them interested. And so we take them on field trips everywhere and go look at heavy machinery moving around. And then this kid's like, oh, I want to do that. And so I have to learn this and learn this and learn this. But what I figured out was you can't just tell them, right? You have to help them understand that it's their idea. And that's, and then once again, not be wedded to what they decide, because they know themselves better than you do, right?
Well, maybe I would argue that nobody knows anybody, including themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's a heck of a discovery process. I think we've had that talk before, right?
We have.
I still don't know who I am necessarily. So I'll figure it out one day. Probably when I'm 95.
Yeah, it's part of the journey, though.
It's part of the journey, right? It's part of the journey. And that's one of the things, Lysne's, been in my realm and how I work with people. And I am very fluid like that. But one of the things I often, caution my new people that I'm training is, remember, their brains aren't fully developed yet. They need you. You can't be completely hands off. They need that guidance. They need you to take them on field trips. They need you to show them that stuff, right? It's like when people are like, oh man, kids these days, they are great with technology. I'm like, no, they're not. I'm like, you think they are because you're bad. So I go, but they're not good at it.
Yeah.
But But you give them the experiences, and they could be, right? But like none of my kiddos wanted to be computer programmers because I never gave them that experience, and you know, our area doesn't have that experience, so they never like really got into that. But like I make them change all their own phone screens, right? Like one of them did it just the other day. Kilted got to listen to her changing her phone screen, and she did, and she's proud and she's excited that she did it herself, and I think that's important, right? But as far as using it, but
and that's one of the things I learned when I was teaching, was that a lot of kids just need to have some ownership over what they're doing. And traditionally, when you have a kid who shows ADHD symptoms or whatever, and they're not doing their homework and you give them something to be responsible for, a lot of times it helps them.
It helps them a ton.
You know, because that's something they can focus on. And the other teachers that I was with would be like, why are you giving him that? He's been bad, right? No, just, we need to talk about it. And we did a lot of talking about things and feelings and
yes. Well, one of my clienteles, as we've talked about on the podcast before, is I deal with wrestlers a lot. And I get that literally all the time from teachers. Like, I can't believe you're making that kid a captain. I can't believe he's a leader on the wrestling team, or that she is doing all of this stuff. And I'm like, that's literally why you're having issues. That's why you're having issues. I go, you're not meeting them where they're at. You're not finding where they're at on the journey. You're dictating your expectations and your outcomes on them. And that's a recipe for disaster, right? You got to hit them where they're at.
Have you ever read William Glasser?
He's name sounds familiar.
So William Glasser, and then there's another book by a guy named E. Perry Good, and it's helping kids help themselves. And essentially, everybody's behavior is based on a need for one of 5 things. It's survival, love, power, fun, and freedom. And so when you see a kid acting out, you're like one of the ways to take care of it is to look and go, do they need do they need approval? Do they need some kind of choice? Right. And you let them make the choice that you can deal with, right? Or do they need some kind of freedom to figure out what they need to do, or power, or, and it's been, that's how we based Da Vinci, was we read a lot of William Glasser. And
yes.
That's how I had my kids grow up. I mean, it's...
And just to be clear, the odds of me reading it are very small. So
yeah. I know that.
If it's not fantasy or... I mean, I read all the Malcolm Gladwell books and stuff, but a lot of education books, what I do is my daughters laugh at me. I'll be reading the first page of chapters and the last pages of chapters. I'm like, zip, 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 zip. And they're like, you're not going in. I go, I only go in deep if I need to know I want to know their thoughts and their summary of their thoughts. And if I don't understand it, then I'll go into the depth.
I'll try and remember to bring the Perry Good book because it's mostly cartoon.
Oh, I love it. Love it.
Nice.
Yeah.
I did have a teacher once. We got assigned a reading, which I'm really bad about that. So college was rough. College was rough because if people tell me to do stuff, then I'm really bad at it. And we had a principal or somebody
anything,
recently,
not just reading.
Yeah, it's not just reading. It's almost everything. But they assigned a book like that, and every teacher had one. They're like, every PD we're gonna go through a chunk of the book, and I had a good friend teacher who came in. They're like, oh, have you done this? I'm like, I'm not going to read that. And they're like, we're going to be talking about that today. And I'm like, and here's the thing. I go, don't tell anybody yet that I haven't read it. I go, we're going to talk about that. And when we're done, you're going to be like, you're amazing. How do you know all of that stuff from the book? And he's like, you are not going to do that. I'm like, hell yes, I am. Literally ran the discussion.
When that happened. I remember you talking about it.
Yes, ran the discussion on the book. And he's sitting there just shaking his head. And I'm like, talking about stuff is not the same as reading the stuff. You don't need that.
Yeah.
So you talked about that Instigator's how you create change and how you start things. And a whole chapter of our book, and something that we've talked about a ton, is how do you start stuff? Because we feel like that's where people trip, right?
Yeah.
Like, so,
Yeah.
like, what was some of the advice you gave people? And people read the book, so we're not going to give you all the spoilers, right? Read the book, Instigators, Creating Change by Lysne Tait. But what's like some stuff that like helps people start?
Well, I think a lot of it is acknowledging that it's scary to start something, but doing it anyway.
Yeah.
You know, that's and one thing I also talk about is that people who are instigators are networkers. They talk to everyone. You know, even if you're not, I mean, like I have a friend who's very introverted and she's like, I don't like this part of your book that you're talking about networking. But just showing up, right, at networking events or at events and listening, I think is a huge thing. Because you don't have to like start the conversation, but you can just listen and you can tell the temperature of what is going on. And if it's something that you're concerned about, you can start finding connections with people that also feel similarly. And yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
One of the things that we preach on our episode is we talk about the fear a lot, but we also talk about that the way to get started is just get started. Like don't wait. Don't think about it, because that'll increase the anxiety and fear. Just do the thing and put away your expectations of the outcome and perfection. Like, get that out of your mind and just do it, which is, as you've seen and as our listeners well know, that's like why we model our podcast this way, right? We want people to see that we're just doing the thing. You just do it. Don't worry about what happens. Don't worry about where it goes. Do the thing. And so, you know, trying to take those fears and say, just jump out of the plane, right?
Yeah. Well, just like if you wouldn't have scheduled your breakfast, like you saw something and you're just like, hey, like, and you weren't thinking like, oh, I'm going to be passing out millions of these things. You were just like, this is something that's important, and you just took that first step.
Right.
And if it would have,
a lot of it happened.
Yeah. And if it would have been 10 people, it would have been 10 people, and that you know, who knows where life would have gone.
Right. And it all comes from that. Yes.
Yeah. My co-founder kept saying, can you believe this is happening? You know, just every time I'd see her, and I'm like, yeah, that's
the way
it's
I do believe.
Believing is important.
Right. Another thing we talk about I talk about in the book is looking for non-traditional solutions to something. You know, like people like, well, we've always done it that way. Well, then it hasn't worked, so let's do it in a different way. Like my father comes up with 3 ways to solve a problem before he actually does it. He's more of a mechanic guy, but you know, it's so thinking about non-traditional and asking people questions. What do you think would work? Or, you know, have you thought about this?
Yeah. Well, it goes back. Everyone's heard that story about the ham, where the girl cuts the ham, and she's like, "Oh, we've always done it that way." Ba ba ba. And come to find out, Grandma pan was only so big, so she had to cut the ham so it would fit in the pan. So, like, that's just the way we've always done it.
Well, and one of the things I've always admired, and you kind of just hit it right there too. One of the big differences between Kilted or Lysne and me is, like, I'm like so much more aggressive, right? Like, you guys are so good about listening, like, oh, what about thinking about it this way? What about thinking about it this way? And I'm like, why are you a dumbass? Like, and you guys are so good about that with your networking. I love that. So, and I am better. Like, Kilted will tell you, Lysne, because he's known me my whole life. I used to be so much worse. I've gotten much better at trying to listen, because it's something you got to identify things to work on, right? And so, learning to just listen.
We need people to cut the crap too, and that's.
I do have that personality. There are certain roles where I'm like, I tell people, like I'll tell our new superintendent when we have a meeting soon, like part of my job is to give you no frills. This is just the freaking way it is. I go, if you want to go have coffee or beer and get like me being genteel, that's good. We can do that. But in this role, my job is just to tell you flat out, and then you deal with the information how you want to deal with it. And, you know, I just can't. Otherwise, it becomes political, and I don't need political in that part. I need political in my political life. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they're two different boxes. So, yeah.
It's too short to play games.
Yes, yes. Well, it takes too long, is what I have found. Right? It takes too long if I'm playing games. I mean, sometimes I play dominoes, and everybody kind of knows that. Like, I set my dominoes up years in advance, and that's good because sometimes you've got to set the stage, right? Like, if you went to the legislator 20 years ago, this would not have worked, right?
Right.
But starting with a breakfast, growing Helping Women, period, getting it bigger and bigger, now your message has resonance, right? Which is important. So sometimes you got to play dominoes. Set them all up. Yeah. So I'm super excited about your book because Kilted and I have talked often about this concept, not about not being the loudest in the room, though Kilted talks about that a lot, but being that change and doing it. So that's terrific. I'm super excited to get my hands on it and read it.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah. I imagine Kilted's probably already bought it if I know him.
It's pulled up right now. I see it here on the Barnes & Noble site.
Yeah, and listeners, I'm going to try to put links on here, but I'll also put links in the comments, and I'll put links on the Twitterverse and all of that fun stuff so that you can get your hands on this book. And I'll put stuff out there for Helping Women, period, because honestly, it's a big deal, right? And it's needed, and it's huge. So it's one of those things you can feel good about supporting people. Like, it's not one of those things where you're like, oh, where's the money going to? Like, it's a thing, right? So
yeah, yep.
When does the book come out?
It's out.
It's out.
Okay, it's out. So where I found it here, I'll have to watch the episode so I can see the link. But I just see the ebook here.
Yeah, the paperbacks will be in the next 2 days or so.
Nice.
Just
Perfect.
takes a while for that to go through the.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And we're so excited that you joined us, and we're probably going to ask you to come on another time because we're hitting our own personal limit for chatting. And I think, Kilted, we should send her one of our journals.
I think that's a great idea.
I'll make sure I get one and send her one so she can see one of our journals. And whenever we finish our book, because we're really lazy writers, we'll make sure you get a copy of our book as well.
Yeah, you'll have. I can link to it too.
Oh my gosh, we just want you to see it. Like, we're pretty good with just like if one person saw our book, we're pretty much happy. So.
Yeah.
And you don't have to. You save yourself from listening to 200 episodes.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I meant to say this, and I know we're getting at the end, but I have like many of our interviews, we're going to get new listeners. New listeners, don't listen to all the episodes. Like, that's not the point. The first, I don't know what, the first 70 episodes can get a little tedious and boring because they're very time sensitive and they're about the businesses we were doing at the time. So we have people, I just saw somebody started listening recently, going through each episode. Don't do that. That's torture. Right?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to go back like a month or whatever, like, okay, like...
Yeah, that's good, and that stuff will resonate no matter when you listen to it. But if you go back to, like, Hidden Dragon Winery, like, or Stoner Cats, like, there's no point in listening to those way back episodes, right? So, if you're here joining us because you're a big fan of Helping Women, period, or you're a big fan of Lysne Tait, just go from here. Right? Don't like try to like go back too far. So, all right, Lysne, we're gonna wrap this up. Do you have anything you want to end with for our listeners?
This was so much fun. I really thank you so much. I had a great time.
Oh my gosh, this was like I told you, this was like one of my super highlights. We could probably end the podcast now, and I'd be pretty excited. So. I'm pretty happy with that. Thank you so much. Be prepared. We may ask you to come on again sometime because I feel like we've got a real surface view, and I feel like we can dig so much deeper. And next time we could like give her like some of our stuff kilted and be like, hey, tell us what you think about channeling aliens, right?
There you go.
Right? And we can get into some of those fun things. I would love to hear those thoughts. Also, I had a thought, Lysne and Kilted. I was pushing. We were recording at a different time, obviously, than normal people. But I had talked to some of our past interviewees and saying, hey, I've got this awesome guest. I'd love for you to be in the Discord messaging us your questions and your queries. But I thought what we really need to do is do either like a spaces or do one of our episodes where we bring in some of these fantastic people and have them like talk this through. Because like, could you imagine if we had like Lysne and Taco Bell and Amy like all across the bottom of the screen right now giving us their thoughts? Oh my gosh, it would be awesome. Amazing. It'd be fantastic. So anyway, that might be cool to do too. So
Kilted Balls and Friends.
Kilted Balls and Friends. Yes. Anyway, listeners, as we promised, we try to not keep you here that long, and I know we went a little bit, but we are super happy. Check out the book Instigator. It's on everywhere. We'll put up links. I'll put it up on here again, but check it out. Thank you all for joining us. Lysne, it was awesome. We really appreciate it. And this is Ballbuster signing off.
Kilted Dragon Jerry, love you all.